name is Kadega, and my job is to get my reward.
Today's episode is only very loosely related to gaming, but it may be the most important video I ever make. Today, I want to talk all about my favorite comic artist, and probably my favorite artist period, Nishizaki Marino. I first discovered Nishizaki Marino's work in the Japan-exclusive Super Famicom game Psycho Dream. Ever since I discovered the Valis games on the Sega Genesis, I had been a big fan of Telenet's games, often more for the music than the actual gameplay. I remember discovering that nearly any game with the Renovation label on it was bound to have top quality music, and later learned that Renovation was just the American localization team for a larger company called Nihon Telenet. In trying to locate all of their games, I eventually ran into Psycho Dream on the Super Famicom. As usual, as a platformer, it was barely average, but the music and graphics were just what I had hoped for. Many people now know the composer, Naruke Michiko, as the musician responsible for the Wild Arms series. What really tripped me out most about the game were the drawings inside the instruction booklet. They weren't anything like the flat anime-style characters that you usually see in video games at that time. Instead, they were really detailed and drawn kind of lifelike, almost like the picture you would see inside an art museum. I remember I could just stare into the pictures and let my imagination run about what kind of lives these people had led. Not just anybody can draw a picture like that. This was the early 2000s, and the internet wasn't quite the compendium of information that it is now. But with a little searching, I eventually found the name of the person who did the graphic design for the game, Nishizaki Marino. I also discovered that he was part of an underground or Dojin comic circle called the NARC Twins. But living in America and having very limited literacy in Japanese, this was about as far as I could go. It wasn't until several years later when I was living in Japan and started making some effort to search around did I find that, with a little perseverance and patience, I could actually get a hold of the books with his drawings in them. Part of what makes finding his work so hard is that he would often just contribute one picture or short episode for relatively obscure comic magazines. And even when these magazines are sold on auctions or by individuals on Amazon, they don't necessarily contain his name as a search term. But over the years, I've been very blessed to get a hold of quite a number of the things he's drawn, and I'd like to introduce them in this episode. Just a warning, there is a lot of tasteful nudity in these pictures, so the younger viewers may want to cover your eyes for some parts. We'll start off with Bennetts A Shoujo. So this is a compilation book of a lot of the other works he had already done, probably published in smaller magazines. It is largely black and white, but it starts out with a 4 or 5 page color section, one small little story, which are really awesome pictures. I mean, these drawings are super detailed. This is the first thing I found of his after moving to Japan, and it really introduced me to just how abstract the guy was. I mean, these pictures are like, I can't even tell what kind of universe this is set in, but I can just gaze into these drawings for ages and not get bored. Next up is a very valuable book. This is the only hardcover illustration collection that Nishizaki Marino put out. It is not all color. There are a few color pages in the beginning, similar to Bennetts A Shoujo, and the rest is black and white, but these are very detailed, meticulous, and beautiful illustrations. And this book is very hard to come across. And these pictures, as is usually the case with him, don't have any kind of running storyline. They're just lightly narrated with each picture. Each one just has a short little poem, you might be able to say, alongside it. And one of the more recent things I've bought, and the most recent thing I've bought by Nishizaki Marino, is a collection of 4 novels that were written by somebody else, but the cover art was drawn by Nishizaki Marino. And these are all in color, as you can see. This was an extraordinary find. I found these as a set. There are actually 7 books in this novel series, and Nishizaki Marino drew the covers for the first 4. And as usual with Nishizaki Marino, these pictures are really detailed, there's a lot of shadowing, and they just bring up an abstract feeling inside of me, like they're drawn in some peculiar, obscure world that is far, far away from ours. There are also some pictures inside of the book, a few black and whites here and there, and another color one right at the very front. It's classic Nishizaki Marino. I love these. I'm thinking about taking off the covers and framing them and decorating my house with them. Next, we're going to look at some of the work he did in the later part of his career, when he was a member of a Dojin Circle called the NARC Twins. They actually spell the name N-U-R-K, but since the Japanese is written as NARC, I've always just read it that way. As I had said before, Nishizaki Marino's drawings weren't really comics in the traditional sense with a running storyline. Instead, they were more like narrated series of pictures, and I don't think drawing comprehensive storylines was what he really wanted to do. This gets balanced out by the other member of the NARC Twins, Goto Jun, who wrote all the text to accompany Nishizaki's drawings. And in fact, in most of the magazines that they published, more than half of it is actually text. But the things that he writes do match well with the worldview that Nishizaki's drawings create. I actually bought all of these by contacting Mr. Goto himself and ordering them. Since they were a Dojin Circle, they would sell these at the big comic market events held in Tokyo every summer and winter, and possibly some other smaller comic events as well. Thankfully, he had back issues of most of their stuff. At least he did 10 years ago when I got all of this. Let's take a look. First off is 32 degrees Celsius. This one is interesting in that the paper quality is higher than all of their other magazines. It's reflective and sturdy. The content is actually quite pornographic. You can see that they were really into S&M. But it's somehow tasteful. Next up we have Choon Soku NARC Twins. This one is a lot more sentimental than their other stuff. It's about a very normal couple going on a honeymoon in London. And there's a section where the man goes off on his own to where they took the picture of the Beatles' Abbey Road cover. I think it was Abbey Road. He kind of realizes halfway through that he's not really having a good time because his wife isn't with him. Okay. And next up we have the Testament series. They drew 3 magazines entitled Testament, although the first one apparently contains 1 and 2, so it's 1, 3, and 4. These are a mixture of pornographic stuff and, well, slightly more serious work as well. There are a lot more pictures and less text in the first one. And again, there's some S&M and pornographic stuff. I remember one story about an old man who had transferred his spirit into the body of a younger woman and that was having really intense lesbian sex with all these girls. Again, some of this is quite pornographic, but it still has his signature style of really detailed faces. I was about to say this one's a lot less pornographic, but once you get into the second half of it, you realize it's not. It's still a lot of nudity. Next up we have Hijitsuryoku Ha Sengen. This is a comicalization of an album put out by a real pop star at the time, Moritaka Chisato. It's kind of all about how she's become objectified and become a very typical existence, just a sort of object or tool of the promotion company. So they draw her as a toy in some parts. I remember this was one of the first stories I ever read of their books, and there's a story called Daite. Daite in this case means make love to me, and it's kind of all about a guy who gets stuck in a room with this beautiful woman, or she kind of traps him there, and she just comes in once or twice a day and just makes love to him and makes sure he has enough food to eat, but just keeps him captive. It's kind of peculiar. And the last one up is No Hunting Allowed, Kinyoku no NARC Twins. This one very clearly says X-rated. It's pornographic. Starts out with an episode about a guy who's kidnapped a girl and is keeping her prisoner in some basement. Okay. Still quite a bit of text for a comic magazine. So this brings to an end this episode on a very obscure chapter of game artwork. Some of you may have noticed that I've been using the past tense to describe Nishizaki Marino for the whole episode. He passed away in late 2004, less than 1 year before I moved to Japan. He was only 42. It's a shame. If I had gotten here just a little earlier, or if he had lived for just a little bit longer, I probably could have met him at Comic Market. So goes life. Thanks a lot for those who stuck around to the end. I'll see you in the next episode.